Greetings and welcome to Free to Learn. My name is Liam Kananga and I'm your host. This is a weekly production brought to you by the Zimbabwe National Students Union in collaboration with the Danish Students Federation. So today we'll be discussing creating safe campuses through combating sexual harassment online and offline. To discuss this topic, I'm joined by Paidamoyo Masaraure, who is also the SRC president at the Women's University in Africa, as well as the Harare Provincial Chair for ZINASU. Paida, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, Paida, so let's get straight into business. Sexual harassment. What is sexual harassment?
Okay, sexual harassment are unwanted behaviors, sexual behaviors that are offensive, humiliating, and intimidating.
Okay.
It can happen physically or online in forms of written form, verbal form, or physical form. And it affects both men and women.
Based on that, can you give us a clear-cut example of acts of sexual harassment on campus?
We cannot deny the fact that sexual harassment is happening at our various institutions, and in most cases, the perpetrators of sexual harassment are lecturers and the boy child at campuses.
Wow.
Right.
I felt that.
Yes, and let me give an example of a thigh for a mark. I'm sure a lot of people have heard about that. A thigh for a mark is where lecturers ask for sexual favors from students so that they can give them better marks.
Okay.
You understand? Of which is unfair for especially female students, because most of them will tend to give in just so that they can get a better mark. In most cases, just because, being a girl child and trying to just acquire your education, trying to further your studies and stuff, it's hard to deny. That's why we see a lot of girls being victims of sexual harassment at institutions.
Okay.
Yes. And there is this thing about the intergenerational relationships that is happening at our institutions, the blessed relationships, where we are seeing older men, right, pursuing sexual interest on the young girls, of which I think that's the most thing that is happening.
Okay, so it's happening in forms of statutory rape, and then there is also uneven yoking or unequally yoking between lecturers and students.
Yeah.
Okay, so now you have shown how much of a problem sexual harassment is. So do you mind telling us what has been done so far by the Students' Union in combating this on campus?
Okay, as a Students' Union, we are totally against sexual harassment at our various institutions here in Zimbabwe. I remember in 2018 at MSU, the MSU's ZINASU chapter managed to get a lecturer who was accused of sexual harassment suspended.
Wow.
And as the union at national level, we have been attending public hearings, lobbying for the Sexual Harassment Act, so that sexual harassment can be criminalized here in Zimbabwe.
Given all that, so far you have mentioned the successes you have scored.
Yes.
And then apart from taking the legal routes, what other initiatives have you been doing on campus?
Okay, we are having gender mainstreaming programs on various campuses, as well as trying to just educate young people, like the students, that they should report sexual harassment if they found themselves victims of sexual harassment, and they shouldn't be intimidated by the authorities, because in most cases students who go to report being sexually violated or sexually harassed, they tend to be intimidated by the authorities who are trying to protect the perpetrator, which are lecturers in most cases, and maybe staff members. So we just encourage students to go report sexual cases of sexual harassment, as well as try and reach out to different organizations, as well as peer-to-peer conversations, talking to people that you trust about being sexually harassed, so that you can get help. Sexual harassment can cause a lot of problems like anxiety, depression, and sometimes you tend to lose focus on your studies.
Yes.
Yeah, so there is need to get help when you're sexually harassed.
Okay, Paida, also there's something you mentioned about other organizations. Which organizations, apart from the Zimbabwe National Students Union, can students approach in terms of them trying to get help after being sexually harassed or even trying to protect themselves from sexual harassment?
Okay, we have Female Students Network Trust.
Okay.
Yes, and we also have WOB, NAYO, a lot of organizations that one can go and get help.
Okay, and then also again, we would like to know how you as female student leaders, particularly those that lead SINASU, you yourself are a leader at the forefront on campus. How do you manage to protect yourself from sexual harassment, given that you interact with these old men, these lecturers, like on a face-to-face basis more often? How do you manage to protect yourself?
Okay, I won't lie, it's not easy being a female student leader or just being a female student. It's not easy. But then we need to educate ourselves as well as the girl child or just any student that you should know the reason why you went to school. You should know your core business there and you should focus. You don't have to lose focus on what you went to school for. Right? You went there to acquire your degree. Go there, do your things based on merit, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
A case of like you yourself, you are a student leader and you are mostly exposed to this kind of men. In the event, like in every event that you come across them, how do you manage at least to create that atmosphere that, you know, they see Paida, they don't see that scrap of meat or piece of meat, but how do you manage to create that image for yourself?
Okay, I think it all goes back to your moral values and principles, how you carry yourself around these men. You know, at some point, we lead men on by the things that we do. But then, if you tell yourself that, no, I'm not supposed to do this, I know nothing can justify sexual harassment. Nothing can justify sexual harassment. When someone sexualizes someone, it's just sexual harassment. But then at the same time, I need to see that I'm not in a situation where I'm sexually harassed. I told myself that I should say no to certain people, even if they have something that I really want. For example, certain opportunities, you know, in the space, we are offered certain opportunities, but I told myself that you should say no. And when it's a no, it's a no. And you shouldn't just be playing around with all this men.
Okay, then let's also look at the victim or the survivor, I would say, of sexual harassment. What can we do to rehabilitate them, or what best can we do as a means to, let's say, avert the problem? Because they usually suffer trauma, depression and stuff. You mentioned this in your introductory statement. So how best can we help them post that phase of being sexually harassed?
Okay, people need to know that you don't choose to be sexually harassed. You don't choose that, right? So there is need to get help. You need to get help. Talk to people that you trust. You need to talk to psychologists, therapists. You need to get help because, you know, being sexually harassed, you end up being depressed, you're having anxiety attacks, you know, and being at school and being sexually harassed at the same time, you tend to lose focus on your studies and stuff. So you need to get help as early as possible.
Paida, can you really help us interrogate, or can you really tell us what really causes sexual harassment?
I think the major drivers of sexual harassment are, you know, from people in power when they abuse their power. And for example, a scenario where a lecturer who is in power tries to get sexual favors from a helpless student, female student. Another issue that we have is because of poverty. You know, we are surviving in a very bad economy, and most students cannot afford, they can afford maybe to pay their fees, but they cannot afford the general living. So we tend to see intergenerational relationships, the blessed relationships happening, where the older people with money takes advantage of the young, you know, the young girls and boys, the blessed relationships, sugar daddies and sugar mummies and stuff. Yeah.
Criminalizing sexual harassment. So on what aspects can we criminalize it, and how can we define it, or what ends of the law can we put in place to make sure that for sure it becomes criminal?
So the thing is, here in Zimbabwe, rape is the only thing that is penalized, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then all other forms of sexual harassment are left aside. There is nothing in the book of law that criminalizes all the other forms of sexual harassment, of which these things tend to graduate. Okay? So there is need for the government to criminalize all other forms of sexual harassment, because that's where it begins, from the little things that people are doing, the body shaming, the slut shaming, as well as all those things.
Okay, so the issue is about at least broadening the criminal codification around sexual harassment.
Yes.
So that it also includes the smallest of all kind of acts that we tend to think that they don't matter.
Sure.
In other words. So now we want to talk about in the event that it happens, and all the other processes of prosecution have happened, but then the survivor remains. So how do we deal with the survivor? You spoke that they can get therapy, but when on campus? Where exactly?
Okay, they can go to the counseling office, or they can go to the chaplain. They can also come to the SRC, the SRC gender desk and stuff. They can get help there.
Okay, so Paida, I think we clearly unpacked it. We brought everything threadbare on the table, and you have managed to highlight a lot of key issues around sexual harassment on campus. So what do you recommend, you yourself as a student leader, what do you recommend in terms of eradicating sexual harassment on and offline, especially among students?
Okay, I think the way to go is just criminalizing sexual harassment and making sure that all the small offenses, all the small things that goes around sexual harassment must be criminalized.
Okay, so in other words, you're saying there is need for supra legislation or bigger levels of legislation,
yes,
that make it a clear statement that sexual harassment is wrong.
True.
Okay, so thank you very much, Paida. Viewers, this was Paidamoyo Masaraure, who recommended that in order to create safer campuses through eradicating sexual harassment on and offline, we need to broaden the law in terms of criminalizing sexual harassment, starting from the smallest acts of it up to the grand of them. And literally, she also spoke about having supporting legislation that speaks against sexual harassment. And my name is Liam Kanenga. I'm your host. See you next week.